Cosmological Argument. The cosmological argument argues about the cause of the universe. It is a more abstract argument. It's a lot less personal than the previous arguments, but its form is pretty simple, and it asks a very simple question, which is, why is there something rather than nothing? So we'll use what's referred to as the cosmological argument. It's very simple. It has 3 steps. The first is that whatever begins to exist has a cause. The second is that the universe began to exist. And the third is that therefore the universe has a cause. Now we only need to defend the first 2 points. The third is a logical necessity. So the first point, whatever begins to exist has a cause. That seems pretty intuitive, but we have to define that nothing cannot create something by definition. Nothing is an absence. It lacks all properties. It cannot cause things to occur. It's not merely empty space, but a lack of anything, of any property whatsoever. So nothing pops into existence uncaused. We know that intuitively. We don't see things pop into existence uncaused. So that would seem to be a pretty easy defense of the first point. The second point, the universe began to exist, we have to consider our possibilities. So if we consider infinity, there's a distinction to be made between the potential and the actual. For something to be potentially infinite, it has to be forever reaching and expanding, like the universe itself, which we know is expanding forever, but it's constantly growing. That's potentially infinite. It's constantly growing. But actually infinite, for something to be actually infinite, it would have to be a complete infinite, a sum in which nothing can be added to it or taken away. It would be complete. It wouldn't be growing anymore because it would be altogether complete. The issue is that for an actually infinite universe to exist is essentially impossible. Mathematicians say that actual infinity simply doesn't occur in the real world. We see it exist nowhere. The only time that it somewhat appears to work is in certain set theories in mathematics, and that's a debated issue. However, if we consider for a minute that the universe was actually infinite, we would have some issues. Existence would be unsolved because the problem of the first cause would be removed infinitely far backwards, and it would demand the universe is uncaused, essentially, some sort of brute fact, which would kind of destroy the question of why is there something rather than nothing. It doesn't give us an answer. Another problem, and we may need to revisit this in our discussion, but if the universe was actually infinite, then we could not exist in the current time. The present would never reach us. Because if we consider time as a linear form, like dominoes falling forward, if we're right here and the universe is actually infinite in both directions, that means that time would have to go infinitely that way, which means that if the dominoes are falling, there's an infinite amount of space between the present and wherever the dominoes are falling. So the present could never actually reach us. Time would never actually reach us. But that's a bit of a different distinction we can talk about more later. However, we have every evidence that infinity does not exist in the universe, an actual infinite, that the universe itself is only potentially infinite, that it's forever reaching and expanding from a single point. And so if we consider that to be true, then we know that the universe began to exist at some point. And so we've defended both whatever begins to exist has a cause, and that the universe began to exist. Therefore, we can say pretty concurrently that the universe has a cause. Now, that's from a purely rational, logical perspective. If we go out and look at evidence, this is where things get more interesting. The Big Bang would support rather than detract from God's existence, because the Big Bang, the cosmological model of the Big Bang, it has a cause, has a starting point. So it says at one point everything came into being and it expands from that point. That follows rather than disagrees with the Kalam cosmological model. And it's quite interesting because for the Big Bang to occur, an uncaused being of absolute power would be necessary to create space, time, and matter out of literally nothing. Such an event would require an uncaused being of absolute power, which existed outside of the universe and was not bound by its laws. And scientists have realized this. I will share some quotes from this book in our discussion, but the basic gist of it is that when scientists discovered evidence for the Big Bang, they were deeply troubled because the previous conception of the universe was that it was infinite, right? Because there was two beliefs. It was either God created the universe or the universe was infinite and uncaused. And so for them to find that the universe had a definite origin, a definite beginning point, was deeply troubling because they recognized that a supernatural being would be necessary for it to occur. If we still deny the Big Bang, the original cosmological argument does not need the Big Bang to be plausible. So we can talk more about that. But the effects of the Kalam cosmological argument is that it dismisses beliefs in infinite universes, such as Hinduism, Buddhism, and certain atheists. It also flips the script if we accept the Big Bang, wherein atheists normally use the Big Bang as a counter to God, but in fact it appears to be the most troubling scientific proof of his existence. Another effect is that for someone to deny the argument, they would have to either deny that nothing cannot create something, which would be seeming to deny the power of cause and effect, or that they would have to deny